Hi, it's Billy. It's been a little while, but I said my second to last video that I put up was about entering BookTube. And I still haven't talked about all the books that I read, not even in 2019. So the first half of this video is going to be dedicated to the books that I read in 2019. So if you just want to hear what I read in 2020, skip to this time point. Honestly, it'll probably be at the bottom, like in the description or a pinned comment or something, because I don't like putting that there. You can't click it, so. Okay. In 2019, I actually read 13. I don't have a physical copy of one of them. So, I'm going to be just talking a little bit about all of the books, what I read in 2019. Let's start off with one of my favorite ones, The Help. I just love this book so much. It's one of the, 10 books that I've read. It's one of the, 10% of books that I think is perfect. I have a very small favorites shelf on Goodreads, and this is one of those that's on there and has stayed on there forever because I love it. I want to reread it again this year, but I also have a massive to be read list. So yeah, go read The Help. It's just really good and I love it so much, and it's perfect actually. There's not one fault that I can find in this book. It's perfect, and I'm not even going to tell you about it because I like to go into books blind, and you're going to go into this book blind. Go read it. I'm going to go put this back on my shelf later. The next book I read, this is Orwellian. This is 1984. Literally, it's 1984. I read 1984 in 2019. Do I remember any of it? Not really. I kind of half paid attention when I read this. I didn't do a good job of reading it the first time. And so now I know the gist of it, and I know when people are like, this is Orwellian, this is 1984, they have never read 1984 then. I can still see definitely how this pertains to modern life. I should reread this again because actually now that I have it in my hands, it's jogging my memory. I remember bits and pieces of it, not a whole lot. I don't remember what I rated this on Goodreads. I think it was like a 4, just because I was having trouble paying attention to it with my dumb ADHD brain. I like things that are really, soaked in action and fun at all times. I'm gonna reread this so that I can actually have a proper opinion. 2 years ago, I didn't pay very much attention to it. Last year, I read so many books and I paid so much attention to all of them. I really, upped my reading game. So I'm gonna reread this. Next up I have Salt to the Sea by Ruda Sapeties. I think that's how you say it. I'm sorry if I said it wrong. I think I gave this 4 stars actually. I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads. I don't know if it's gonna remain at 4. It might be bumped down to a 3. I think the tragedy of this book made me give it a 4. It's split between 4 different perspectives, and in that it's kind of weak in that aspect because you never get to spend too much time with any one character, so you don't get a super strong feel for who they are. And that being said, about halfway towards the end part of the book, you actually get to know these characters, and then sad things happen. I'm not gonna say what it is because I don't want to spoil it. But overall, I didn't actually know that this tragedy in this book was 6 times deadlier than the Titanic. It was the worst disaster ever, I think. I literally forgot what the name of the ship was. The Wilhelm Gustloff. I think that if you are a history buff, you'll really like this book. If you like sad things and olden-timey things, read this book. It's good. I mean, I like it. It has a somewhat happy ending. I'm not gonna say whose happy ending is whose because there's 4 different main characters in this book. So, I mean, yeah. I probably won't read this again but reading it the first time, I was looking forward to it, and it didn't really disappoint. It was pretty good. I don't remember a ton about it because of all the characters being chopped up into all these little pieces in the book. Like, you have one Emilian, one Florian, Amelia, Alfred. You jump between all these different perspectives so much that you don't get a very strong sense of their character, but you do get a sense of their character. I don't think I will be keeping this. I will be giving it to a little library, which is one of my favorite ways to donate books, especially books that you think are good. So I'm gonna put this in a little library. Next up, I have Marked. I don't have a lot to say about this because I don't know if you can see all those little bookmarks. I want to do a more in-depth review of The House of Night because I have got a lot to say about this book series. So Marked is the first in the House of Night series, and I used to read this in middle school, and then I dropped off around like the 6th or 7th book. I don't remember why, something dumb happened, but then again, usually something dumb always happens in these books. They're not super great, and I'll have a lot to say about them once I read more of them. I might do like a 3-book per video type review because there's like 12 of them, but I would very much like to do a full review of these because there's something else. Next up, I have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. 2019 really was the start of Neil Gaiman is my favorite author. Good Omens came out that year. The Good Omens TV show came out that year, and that's also the year that I read Good Omens, which is in the pile. I'll talk about that in a second. Anyway, The Ocean at the End of the Lane is one of my favorite Neil Gaiman books, even though like everything he writes is one of my favorite Neil Gaiman books. It's got the creepiness of like Coraline, but it also like the way that he describes these places almost liminally, like they're liminal spaces. I really, really like it. They're like poetic, and everything feels like the monsters, I guess, that you would call. And these books feel like ancient evils from Greek mythology or something like that. Yeah, this one's good. I like this one a lot. I like this one so much. The little witch character, the main character, I like it so much. It's so good. I'm not really good at emphasizing my thoughts about this, but I love it a lot. If you like Neil Gaiman, definitely read this. I'm slowly making my way through his entire line of work, and this one is like, I don't know, this almost feels like one of those books that I would pass on to the next generation. Be like, hello little 12-year-old or whatever, do you want to hear a scary story? I'll read this to you, because it's good, and I got it in hardcover, which means I really, really like it, and I'm going to keep it forever. This one will go on my favorites shelf, probably. I think I gave it like 5 stars on Goodreads. I'm trying not to be like, oh, it's Neil Gaiman, therefore it must get a 5. I'm just trying to be like, it's just that good, man. He writes good stuff. Next up is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the second Narnia. You probably know about Narnia. I like this book and The Magician's Nephew the most. When we get to the 3rd book, which I read last year, it starts going a little squirrely, and I'll describe that later. Narnia is really like, I think this is one of the stronger ones, just by the first one and the second one are some of the stronger versions of the Narnia books because the world expands so much and there's like this great journey to go places, which I really like. I have more thoughts regarding the series, but The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is, I think, my second favorite after the first one. The Magician's Nephew is just that good. It creates an entire world. Unfortunately, a lot of the other books don't seem to expand on the world as much as the first and the second one do, which is why the first and the second one are good. I love them the most, so I think I'm gonna put this back on my shelf. I don't know about the rest of the series. I'll explain why later. And next up on my stack, I have Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Sir Terry Pratchett. This is such a good book, my dude. I love this book so much that the little harp and the pitchfork at the back of the book, I got them put in my skin forever. The book, I made the mistake of watching the show before I read the book, so I didn't pay attention to it as much as I would have liked. However, this is really one of the best books. This is going on my favorites shelf, and I'm gonna try not to reread it every year, even though I really want to, because I heckin' love it so much. It made me a super fan of Michael Sheen. Perfect casting for that, but I'm talking about the book. This book is like the perfect example of wacky British humor and like crazy things happening and all, but it's just, it's so good. I love it. If you haven't already read Good Omens, I highly, highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of books that like have silly British humor and absurd plots and crazy things happening all the time, and things that involve like biblical figures and absurd fashions is also fun. Again, just go read Good Omens. And next up is another Neil Gaiman book. It's Coraline. I really, really, really like this book. I'm gonna say I like the movie more. It might have been a mistake to try to watch the movie first and then try to compare it to the book, because one is entirely visual and one is entirely word oriented, so you're not gonna get the same experience. However, I feel like Coraline's character was expanded on very well in the movie. In the book, she doesn't have that much of a character. She's just kind of like a little girl. But in the movie, she's, you know, sassy and brave and does all this stuff. I really like the entire concept of this book, though. It's very Neil Gaiman in that it involves like different worlds and scary creatures from different dimensions, or whatever you would call it. It's so imaginative. It's such a unique concept, and the way that he writes it out. The book is much scarier than the movie, I will say, and it's the kind of book that I would love to pass on to the next generation and read to children. I think I would want to read the book before showing the movie, though, because the book is scarier than the movie, and having to go from super scary to not as scary would be less traumatizing, I guess. But this movie still holds the same. This book holds the same charm as the movie. It's just like, I don't know how to describe it, more like ancient, evil, spooky, scary book way instead of like action-y type way, which I like. So I'm gonna put that on my favorites shelf. Oh, here's another one. It's The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. I don't know what it is. I just love Neil Gaiman's work so much. This one is about a boy. Also, this one was more memorable. I don't know why I remembered this one so much. Possibly because I did a whole photo shoot with it. But this one is about a little boy that has been left in a graveyard, and he's raised by ghosts and a vampire, which I think is super cool. And he makes a friend, and they go do some spooky stuff in the graveyard. That's all you're getting, because I refuse to spoil really good books, and I like when people go in blind. That's cool. I like that so much. A lot of Neil Gaiman's work seems to like focus on spooky things and like dead things, which is cool. I like that a lot. I love so much of Neil Gaiman's work, and like 2019, honestly, I didn't read any bad books. All of the books that I read that year were good. Like the worst quote-unquote book would be 1984, just because I couldn't read it and I wasn't paying attention to it enough. But all of the books that I read, like half of them are going to end up on my favorite shelf, including this one. This one is so good. I want to read it to like a kid as well, because it's the type of story that deserves to be passed on to the next generation. And it's all of his work is so creative and like macabre in playful ways. Next up is Hyperbole and a Half. You thought I was gonna say Neil Gaiman. I have finished with the Neil Gaiman books from 2019, not 2020. I read a couple Neil Gaiman books in 2020. Anyway, Hyperbole and a Half is one of my favorite books ever. I've never laughed out loud to a book the way that I've laughed out loud to Hyperbole and a Half. Just the absurdist humor and like the meme culture and the playfulness around things like depression. And it's very relatable, because even though I don't have like depression or anything like that, I can relate to a lot of the ways that she deals with certain things, and that if I laugh enough, maybe it'll go away. This book is hilarious. It's one of my favorites. I read it like every year. I've read it so much that the spine is starting to fall apart, unfortunately, so I have to be very gentle with it. I want a hardcover of it. I love it so much. It's so funny. If you are one of the early internet meme lords, you will recognize this from the Clean All the Things. And she spawned one of the first memes and made a very, very, very funny book. Because Clean All the Things isn't even the funniest thing in this book. It's arguably one of the least funny things. It's so funny. It tackles things from like depression to growing up, unfortunate situations, flawed coping mechanisms, mayhem, and other things that happened. Warning signs, the simple dog makes me laugh so hard, motivation, the god of cake, yeah, all these things. Please read Hyperbole and a Half. It's so good. It was also one of the least read books that I read in 2019 according to Goodreads. And that is shameful. How dare you? Go read this book. It's so good. Next up is The Magician's Nephew, the first book. I rated them backwards. I got the pretty version of this book in that it's brand new and clean and has illustrations. I think this is a great book. The intense level of world building is comparable to things like Lord of the Rings. Literally an entire world spawns out of this book, an entire dimension, whatever you would call Narnia. It is a classic. It's really good. I read it the first time in middle school. I didn't make it all the way through the series, I don't think, but I made it all the way to Prince Caspian, I think. When I read this one, I was like, why didn't they make a movie out of this? This one's way cooler. It creates an entire world that the entirety of Narnia is based on, but whatever, I guess. I only recommend the first 2 Narnia books for reasons I will get to once I get to the third, but this is classic, and I think the world building is pretty cool. I have more words about the Narnia series, but those are from my 2020 books, so I will move on. And finally, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is another classic. I think it's a very important book. I know a lot of people are unkind to it because of what it's about, especially in times like modern times when we deal with inequality and police brutality and all this kind of stuff. It seems way behind the times, but at the time that it was written, it was actually, it was one of the kinder books, and I think that was really important in helping for people of color to be seen as human instead of, not human. But then again, I am just a lady, and I do not know the struggles of people of color, so I can't really speak on how anyone would feel about this book. I can only speak about how I feel about this book, and I like this one. It has I remember when I was a kid and we had Charlotte's Web read to us. It was one of those classic books that I paid super amounts of attention to. I got lost in it, and it was the same in this kind of book. This is the kind of book that I got lost in. I think I gave it a 4-star on Goodreads, I can't remember. But I definitely think it's very important in the history of all books, but also support authors of color. I don't really pay attention to who it is I buy books from, but I think I should definitely start supporting more authors of color because I think that's pretty cool. Maybe I'll get more to that in my 2020 reading list, but this is one of the books I'm definitely going to keep it on my shelf. I might read it again. I don't know when, but it's definitely a read again book. So that's all my books. They're in that little pile. The only book that I'm giving up so far from 2019 is Salt to the Sea, just because I'm not a huge fan of tragedies, and it was only a 4 out of 5 stars for me. It's just not something I could see myself reading again. The main crux of the book is that you are concerned about these characters and whether or not they're going to survive, and then you get to the end and you're like, I know what happens. There's not really a reason for me to read it again. So that's that on that. That's my 2019 reading list. I am proud to say that I doubled that in 2020, so I'm going to go get my 2020 books and bring them over here. I just realized I forgot to review one of my books. Beautiful Boy. I do not have a physical copy of this because I already gave it to someone. That being said, I have good things to say about Beautiful Boy. I have never had first-hand account with anyone that has been suffering with substance abuse, thankfully. I know it can be extremely difficult. I have seen people that I know and people that I'm close to have had people that struggle with substance abuse. And I think it was easier for me to kind of understand what that is because of Beautiful Boy. Before then, I had always had the opinion, the not great opinion, that, oh, it's their fault they started doing it, which, yikes. And then I read Beautiful Boy and I understood more about how people could have substance abuse problems. And that it really is like this whole big deal type thing. It made me see things from like an addict's perspective and from someone that loves an addict's perspective, and I felt way more sympathy towards people that struggle with substance abuse problems now and then, and I think that book for it. I gave it like 4 stars, I think. The reason for that is because I felt that some parts of the book were a little long-winded, like there were some paragraphs describing things that didn't really need to be there. The descriptions of Nick and his struggle were very good, but there were just a few things that I was like, okay, can we continue the story? You're kind of bogging it down with all this description. That's the only real thing that I felt wasn't really wrong with the book but could have been improved. Other than that, I think Beautiful Boy is a beautiful book. I don't know if I'll read it again though, especially because I've already given it to someone else. I was going to put it in the little library, but I gave it to someone else instead, and I think that they will like it. So that concludes my 2019 book review. Now it is time for the 2020 book review. All of these that I read last year. Let me see if I can scoot them into frame. They're very precariously stacked. Here they are. So I read 32 books in 2020 of my goal of 20. So I surpassed it by 12, which is pretty cool. Not all of the books that I read in 2020 are even in the stack. I think I also gave one away. No, I left it at my sister's house. Cool. So let's get started. I'm not going to rate these from like most hated to least hated or favorite, simply because I don't want to disturb the stack. It is very large and will fall over very easily. So I'm just going to take the first one off the top, which is Life of Pi. Life of Pi, I had struggled to read it the first time. I didn't get past the first, there's 3 parts of this book, which is the first part where he describes his life before the shipwreck, and then being stuck at sea and everything. I couldn't get past that part, but I found it much more interesting this time. It's very religiously centered, which is interesting. I will not give out my personal feelings about religion, because either way, someone's gonna be mad at you. So I'm not gonna participate. So I did find it very, very interesting in the beginning instead this time. When I first tried to read it, I was in middle school and I was just couldn't do it. The ending of this book, I don't want to spoil it, but I will say it changed my perspective on things and I want to reread it, if only to see it from the way that it was described in the ending, which I thought was incredibly interesting and changed the whole meaning of the book for me. So yeah, it's pretty good. I think I gave it like a 4 out of 5. It had the same problem as Beautiful Boy in that it was a bit long-winded in some sections and I just wanted to keep moving. But overall, this is a very, very interesting book, and I haven't seen the movie. This is one of those books that I was like, no, I want to read the book before I see the movie type thing. And I'm really glad I did, because I think that helped with me reading the first half of it and having more interest in it. So I think I will keep this book, if only because I want to read it again. Okay, so next book. I don't like the way this is shifting. Is The Rosie Project. I very rarely read romance books just because they're very predictable. And my thing is, why read something that I can predict? There's just no reason to, because I can predict the whole thing. The Rosie Project takes a very interesting view to romance. This is written from the point of view of Don Tillman. He is an autistic man who creates this this survey type thing to try to find the perfect wife. And he starts working with this lady called Rosie because he works in genetics or something like that. It is science. And he is trying to help her find the identity of her birth father. So this is actually one of the few romance novels that I can stomach because it was pretty unpredictable. Granted, there are a couple of spots where I was like, okay, I know what's going to happen, and then it happened. Also, the ending felt a bit rushed. Throughout the book, him and Rosie interact, and you know that they're going to get together because obviously, but at the very end, it seems kind of rushed. Like they kind of at the very end decide that yeah, they want to date and get married, which okay. It's literally the last 3 chapters that they get together, which is a little rushed, but in the entire book, it's not really a slow burn. They kind of dance around each other, and then they do romantic things together, and then you think they're not going to get together, but then they suddenly get together in the last 3 chapters. That's the only real gripe I have with the book. Other than that, it's like a 4 out of 5 stars. I really like it. So I'm definitely keeping this one. I actually really like it. I reread it this year, or last year, because I read it before in high school, I think, or a little out of high school, college, I don't know. I read it a while ago, a couple of years ago, and I really liked it then, and I still really like it now, so it's held up after my tastes in book changes, because I've kind of become more harsh towards books. So, yeah, The Rosie Project, this one's pretty good. If you don't like traditional romance novels, want something more scientifically based, I guess, this one is a pretty good book, so I recommend this one. Next up is T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. What really can be said about Mr. Eliot? It's a book of cat poetry. Racially insensitive cat poetry. There's a slur or two in this book, so, and I know a lot of people are like, well, it's a product of its times. There's a couple things that are a product of their time, but they don't use slurs. They may be a little racially insensitive, but they don't use actual slurs. So, these are cute little illustrations. I like some of the poems, the ones that are not filled with slurs. It's silly. I've never seen cats, by the way. I think I would hold on to this book, if only for it to be like a coffee table book. But I definitely would not read this to a child, because yikes. Maybe a more, a book with that one poem cut out, because I think it was only like 1 or 2 poems that had slurs in them. Other than that, it's a cute little book of cat poetry, like a cute silly book of cat poetry that I might get a tattoo of. Look at that little chap. Isn't he fancy? I like him. So, yeah, I'll keep it only for coffee table book reasons. This book is a Neil Gaiman book. Who would have guessed? American Gods. I think the TV show came out last year or the beginning of 2020. I can't remember. I keep acting like it's still 2020. It is 2021. 21?
21?
This is one of the like 4 Neil Gaiman books that I read this year. This one took up the most time because it's like 600 pages long. I honestly don't remember like the first half of this book, but it still has that Neil Gaiman. It's less macabre than his other books. It's more like adventure centric. There are still very many quirky characters, which I like. I like his cast of quirky characters that he always has. I like this book. I don't think it would be one of my favorites, unfortunately. It just took so long to read that I forgot like the first half of it, so I definitely want to reread it so I can have a stronger opinion of it. But from what I do remember, it was really good, and I think it was really cool that the climax of the book took place at a place that I've kind of been at. It's some national park in like Arkansas, which I have been to, which I think is pretty cool. So I could vividly picture the places that they were describing in this book, which I just think is neat. I like the road trip aspect of this book. I like how mysterious a lot of the characters are. I like all the hijinks that ensue. Definitely read this. I want to watch the American Gods show, but I think I want to give this another read through before I do. I was going back on the shelf, not on the favorites, but on the likes, at least until I can read it again and more accurately describe my opinions on it. Next up is one of my favorite books, actually, from middle school, Holes. I think I read the book before I saw the movie, even though the movie was constantly playing on Disney. I found this at a bookstore and I bought it because I needed this on my shelf because it's one of my favorite books. It's one of those books that I can remember loving since the first time I read it. And it's very intricate, especially for a kid's book. Like, there's so many like layers of things that are happening. It goes from the past to the present and they're connected and all these things. I just think it's neat and it's cool, and I think it's a very good book for kids to read, especially kids that are interested in like intricate plots. So yeah, definitely read Holes. I like the show, and the show is actually like one of the few books, like book accurate movies that I really like. It's really, really close to the source material. If you like books in the middle school like reading range, intricate plots, past things, plots all tied up together, I don't know. Just read this one. It's good, okay? I'm gonna go put it in my favorites shelf. Next up is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So, J.K. Rowling is trash. I bought these books before her whole turf thing happened. It's hard to discuss Harry Potter now without discussing the politics around J.K. Rowling. So let me get that out of the way first. I no longer support J.K. Rowling. I don't want to throw away such a beautiful book series though because of her. However, I will not be supporting her financially, especially anymore. All of my merch, if I get any merch, will be secondhand. I'm going to try really hard not to go to the Harry Potter park. I just love that park so much, but I know that she's such a garbage person. Maybe if I go, I'll like donate to a trans charity the same amount that I paid going to the Harry Potter world. I don't know, Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is also a garbage business because they donate to conversion camps, which are gross and terrible. It's just like a burger joint. It's not ingrained into my childhood the way that Harry Potter is. So it's hard to not support J.K. Rowling anymore because this is like such an intense part of my childhood. I'm going to not support her anymore, and I encourage you not to as well, especially if you are an ally or anything like that. That being said, I still love Harry Potter. I don't think I could ever really hate it. I can hate J.K. Rowling because she is not integral to Harry Potter. She doesn't matter. She just wrote it. That being said, the first Harry Potter is the weakest one after you read it the second time. I have read Harry Potter like a grand total of 10 times over and over. And it's always a slog to get through the first one because so much of it is on explaining. Understandably so, this is the first book. They've got a lot to explain, an entire world to build. But reading it the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and finally 10th time, I always have to like get over the hump of this book and then to the second book, which is my favorite one. So yeah, Harry Potter will always remain on my favorites shelf. I will not be supporting J.K. Rowling anymore. Back on the favorites shelf you go, Harry. Someone else buy the rights to Harry Potter so I can financially support it again, please. Thank you. Next up is another Neil Gaiman book. This one is Art Matters. So this is a cute little illustrated type book. And it's like a little, it's almost like a little speech. This makes me really inspired to write more because it's like my favorite author giving me a little pep talk. I think it's a very cute book. I think it's good to read to kids. Get it for a creative in your life if they are struggling with being creative. It's a really like adrenaline shot in the arm type book where you're like, yes, I want to go make things. I want to write. I want to make art because art matters. Thanks, Neil. I want to be an author like you one day. One day, hopefully. This is another coffee table book that I'll definitely keep around. Yeah, it's one of my favorites as well, but it's more of a coffee table book because it's very short. It's like 120 pages or something. Next up is The Picture of Dorian Gray. I wanted to read more classic fiction last year, and I was on my second book before that it got stolen from me, so that's cool. That being said, I have like 2 or 3 more classics on my shelf that I hope to read this year. The Picture of Dorian Gray, I gave it like 4 stars. It was fun to try to challenge myself to read something that was written in Old English. Granted, this one is more middle of the road in between like Shakespearean English and modern day English, so it wasn't that much of a struggle to read. I thought it was very interesting. I really like this book. The only reason I think I would give it like a 4 stars out of 5 instead of a perfect 5 is the anti-Semitism. I didn't know that freaking Oscar Wilde was anti-Semitic until I read this and I went, yikes. So there's that. I think it's a very cool book though. I just wish that it didn't have that part in it, where the anti-Semitism is. It's a very interesting book. It doesn't drag the way a lot of classic books tend to do for me. A lot of them get like bogged down in all this description and all these like boring things happening, and I'm like, just get back to the plot. This one doesn't do that, which I like. It kind of takes road trips off of the main plot to see what Dorian is doing or his fellow people, but overall it sticks to the main plot of Cursed Portrait, which I like a lot. So I think I'm going to keep this one actually because I think it's a good book. I don't know, I might get rid of it, but I also like it enough to keep it. It's not on my favorite shelves for sure, but it's probably on my liked shelf. So next up is, we're going out of order, The Silver Chair. I actually like this one enough to keep it, I think. It was more world building. This is the one where a prince is kidnapped and they have to go save him and they go on a magical adventure, which I think is cool. It builds the world more. It's a fun little adventure quest thing. It felt Lord of the Rings-ish in that aspect, which I like because I like adventure fantasy themed books. I like this one way more than a lot of the other books, so I think I would give this one like at least a 4 out of 5. And some of C.S. Lewis's books, it gets a little racist. I don't think it was really shown in this book though. This one is, this one's fine. I think this is one of the better ones. So if I had to keep any of the books, I would say 1, 2, 6, maybe 7? I don't know. I haven't finished 7 yet. But 6 is one of the better books. It's not bogged down by boring plots or racism. I might keep it, I might get rid of it. It's weird to keep only a certain number of books from a series. I used to think that C.S. Lewis would be one of those things that I would read to my kids, but after seeing like the other books are really like bogged down with all these racist things in a really subtle way that could definitely get into a kid's head, I'm like, no, I'm gonna pass. Actually, number 5 isn't that bad either. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is more world building as well. They go sailing around the world basically. One of the kids gets turned into a dragon. I think that's neat. I think that's really neat. I wish that the other two books in the series were more like 5 and 6, because 5 and 6 are actually pretty cool. They're little adventure stories that are not racist, which is really cool. I like these. I'm gonna probably not keep it. It's weird to keep like 4 out of 7 of the books in the series. Next is What If It's Us? So remember how I said I didn't like romance novels? Unfortunately, I wanted to like this book so much because I really like LGBT books. Most of them anyway. I haven't read a whole lot of them. I really wanted to like this one, but this one is like 3 out of 5 stars for me because so much of this is talking about Hamilton, which I haven't seen and which was spoiled for me in this book. Why does this depend so much on Hamilton? It's really weird. Over half of the descriptions in this book, like half of what they're talking about, is Hamilton. And I'm like, cool, haven't seen it, don't know what's going on, but Billy, Hamilton came out in 2015. It's not your fault that you haven't seen it. Yeah, well, a book shouldn't have to depend on another work of fiction in order to be watchable or readable. So, like, they mentioned one of the 3 songs I know from Hamilton, and I couldn't read any farther because I was just thinking about that song. This book actively made me put it down to go and listen to a song instead of continue reading it. That being said, it's a pretty cute, it's like a meet-cute story, and the 2 main characters kind of dance around each other because it takes place in New York and they have to find each other again. So it's cute in that aspect. I'm not going to say whether or not it has a happy ending. I think Arthur was the one that got on my nerves a little bit because so often in like young couples I've seen is that they don't know how to communicate, and it's like just talk to each other. It's not that hard. Granted, it's awkward when you have to bring up awkward things, but it's never going to improve if you don't get over the hurdle and talk about the awkward thing. So 3 out of 5. I don't think I'll be keeping this book just because I didn't enjoy it that much. I thought it was cute aspect to it, but it was really dragged down by the characters being just a teeny bit annoying, and also the reliance on Hamilton to connect the characters anyway, personality-wise. So, yeah, I think this one's gonna go to the little library as well. I think someone else would really like this, someone that's really into Hamilton or pop culture or whatever you want to call it. It's definitely a cute LGBT book. So if you're into LGBT things and cute, like meet cutes, and Hamilton, give this one a try. I think you would like it. But for me, I'm going to be passing it on to someone else. Next up is a new favorite on the shelf, From Here to Eternity by Caitlyn Dodie. This book is so good, and I will never get over the fact that I could have met Caitlyn Dodie and gotten her to sign my copy of Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? That came out last year, and I was this close to meeting her. She was coming to the Tattered Cover in Denver, and I hesitated a little too long, and it sold out. So Caitlyn, please come back to Denver. Thank you. Anyway, From Here to Eternity is traveling the world to find the good death. So Caitlyn Dodie also makes a lot of videos on YouTube. You might have heard of her Ask a Mortician series. She is like she has a death positive movement going on, where people are more comfortable about talking about it because it's the one thing that all humans will experience. This book is about her going around the world and exploring different death practices based on different cultures, different areas of the world, what laws prevent some things from happening. I think what was really cool is the first chapter is about an open air pyre cremation, and it takes place in Colorado, in Creston, I think, which is pretty cool. I don't know how far that is for me, probably really far, but this is going on my favorite shelf. I love it so much. If you have any anxiety around death, I would highly recommend looking up Caitlyn Dodie and her work. She made me realize that I wanted a natural burial, actually, instead of the traditional burial, and has made me way more comfortable about talking about things like funerals and death plans and all this kind of stuff. So if you are even a little bit anxious around death, I would highly recommend looking her up, reading her books. This one is so good, especially if you love hearing about different cultures, even if it's just death practices. Some of these are downright beautiful the way that they're described, and I love them, and you should read them. This isn't the only Caitlyn Dodie book that I read this year. I read all 3 of them. But yeah, I think this one's my favorite out of all her works, just because of the exploratory nature of it. Next, I have the League of Legends Realm of Runeterra book. So I started playing League around the end of 2019, I think. And I didn't really have a main until Set came out. Set's my main. I love him. Stinky Catboy. I know he's a Wolverine. I like calling him a Catboy. I gave this like a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I just wish it had gotten a little bit more in detail about the areas that it describes. It goes everywhere, all over the map. Half of the book is describing the areas, and the other half is putting in a little story in the area. I wish that they had just stuck to only describing it. Most of the stories, I think, except for one, are not about League characters. They may have League characters as like side characters, but it's not about the characters that are from this area, which is unfortunate. But I wish they had gone into more detail around these areas, like the culture of Ionia versus Demacia, or the Freljord versus Bilgewater, and all these areas, because I think it'd be really cool. Tell me what foods they eat, tell me what they wear, tell me what the jobs are, what it's like living in these areas. At most they got like 5 or 6 pages worth of describing the areas, and then they would go to a story, which meh. I wish that it had described the areas a little bit more, but as far as this goes, it's not bad. If you are into League lore, if you want to know a little bit more about the setting of the realms of Runeterra, then I think that this would be a book for you. If not for that, then it would be really cool to build OCs for the realms of Runeterra. Next up is Prince Caspian. I don't really remember too much about this book. It was kind of like a quest what is bogged down by a lot of side quests and unnecessary detail. I think it's also one of those white savior books, which boring. Okay? Boring. Problematic and boring. I don't remember too much about this book other than Prince Caspian needs to go rule again or whatever, but overall it's boring. I didn't like this one. I gave it like 3 out of 5 stars. I don't even really have that much to say about it because it was so boring. And it's like in the beginning of the book, Prince Caspian has to flee because his uncle wants to kill him or something. And then he faffs around in the woods and then finds Edmund, Susan, Peter, and Lucy. There. They find them and then more faffing around and then he's king. It just... I'm not going to keep this book. So I don't know if I should get rid of the entire series with it because I actually like the other books. It's just this one was a slog. And the other 2 are the only ones I really like. Next up is The Horse and His Boy. I actively dislike this book. This one is about a white kid that gets stolen by people of color, and then the people of color are vilified for it, and their culture is like shamed. So not my favorite. The people of color in this book are very obviously based off of Middle Eastern people, and then demonized, which was not great to read about, and it was gross and not fun. The kids are still kings and queens of the land, but there's a prince. Put the king back in power, the end, the book. It did have the adventure, but unfortunately it was also racist, so I didn't want to read any of it. I'm not keeping this book, and I won't be reading it to my children because I do not want them to have, you know, bad feelings towards people of other cultures. That's weird and gross and not great. So, next up, another Caitlyn Dodie book, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Tales from the Crematorium. This one has a tad bit of the dark humor, which I like. A lot of this is talk of her experience in the crematorium, which I thought was really interesting. And for a little bit, I wanted to be a mortician. And then I was like, wait, I like books more, so I'll just be a literary agent instead. But it's really inspiring how she talks about these things. It makes me much more comfortable around death. It gets a little real at one point. It's definitely another favorite, 5 out of 5 stars, because it's beautiful. I think it's very informative about dead bodies and the way that we treat dead bodies, especially in the American culture, because a lot of other cultures seem way more at home and at peace around dead bodies than we are. I just think that's interesting, and I think it would be a lot better if we all kind of took Caitlyn's approach to it's a dead body, it's not going to hurt you, it used to be someone you love, maybe respect it type thing. So I highly recommend this one as well as her other one, especially if you are death phobic or if you are extremely uncomfortable around things of this nature. But I think this is a really, really good book, and I love it so much. I'm going to read it again, definitely. Probably not this year, but eventually. And I want all my friends to read it, and I want Caitlyn to come back to Denver, please, so you can sign my book. Next up is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book is so weird. Halfway through, like the first half of it, I was fine with. The first half of it was like a normal-ish story. And then the second half happened, and I was kind of lost. This is the kind of book that you have to read multiple times over, and I wasn't sure if I liked it or not. I think I gave this like a 3 out of 5, because it's so weird that I don't understand it. This is such an odd tale, and maybe it's because I'm dumb and I don't understand metaphor. A lot of things happen in this book. A lot of it is not connected in the normal way, like things are told backwards, things are told out of order, things that you wouldn't think are linked, and if you don't pay attention to one aspect, you will miss the other aspect entirely, which I think is what happened when I read this. So I'll definitely have to read this again and give a more thorough opinion about it. I read it because my friend loved it, and I like the aesthetic of this book. I like the mention of liminal spaces. It's very unique, I'll say that much. The love story in it is sweet. Everything else is incredibly confusing though, and I will have to be reading this again for a more thorough opinion. I think I'll make an entire review of this book, just an entire video reviewing just this book, because it's that unique and weird. It'll definitely be staying on my shelf at least for another read through. I don't know if it'll keep on the shelf after that. It just depends on how well I'm able to untangle this entire thing. Next up is Fangs by Sarah Anderson. So I picked this up thinking that it was going to be an entire like normal story, but it's more like a bunch of tiny comics put together about a vampire and a werewolf dating, and they're really cute. It's so cute. It's got like dark humor and puns and all this silly stuff, and I like it a lot. And I think it's super cute. I think I bought this around Halloween last year, and I loved it then. It's definitely one of those like coffee table books, but it looks so pretty. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's got like a nice velvet cover. If you like Sarah Anderson's comics, I would recommend this one a lot, especially if you like vampires, if you like werewolves, if you like cute stories, things of that nature. It's very well illustrated. It kind of tells a cute story as the relationship progresses, because it shows them like meeting and then getting together, doing all this stuff. It's cute, but it's not a complete story. It's just kind of like snippets of their life, which I think is cute. So this, I think it's gonna go on my favorites shelf. You know what? It's gonna go on my favorites shelf because it's cute and I like it. Like halfway through all the books I read this year. I think I'm missing 2 of my books actually. Next up is the Good Omens script book. So I read Good Omens last year and I was completely enraptured into the point that I bought like 3 different copies of Good Omens. I have the TV companion, I have the script book, and I have the illustrated version as well as the original book. I like the script book. There's deleted scenes in this one. If you are into Good Omens to the point that you literally cannot stop talking about it, I would recommend this book for you. It gives more insight into behind the scenes. I think it shows a little bit more of Neil Gaiman's writing style and his playfulness in not only writing books but writing scripts. It shows all the ways that it changed from script to TV show, because there were a couple changes in the way that the script was written and the way that it showed up on TV, which I think was cool. It's just Good Omens in script form. Usually I'm really bad about reading scripts, but I really like Good Omens, so I was willing to give it a chance. And I'm glad I did, because I learned a little bit more about Good Omens and script writing, which I think would be cool to do. Probably not a favorite shelf, but definitely a liked. Next up is Dkmh by Montgomery. This is a book of poetry by one of my favorite authors. Okay, first off, I'm not really a poem. I don't know how to read poems or understand poems. That being said, a lot of the poems in here were very hard to understand. And there were 1 or 2 that I liked, but they were like over 50. I think a lot of them got a little too pretentious. I think a couple of the poems in here were a little too pretentious. Like he was writing something that he thought was very profound, and I was reading it like, what? Like it was supposed to be like, oh wow, that's really cool. One of these is about an egg, which, okay. I just think poetry should be like pretty and romantic and cool. So writing poetry about an egg and acting like it's profound is not my cup of tea. Don't know if I'll be keeping this one. I want to read it again to try to understand poetry more. I want to get more into poetry. And then read other poetry books and try to compare this one to it. But this one I would give like 3 out of 5 stars. A lot of people are just like destroying this book online on Goodreads, but I think also those people read more poetry than I do. So half of it may just come from misunderstanding. I didn't want to dislike this book because I really like Dacre Montgomery, especially as an actor, but maybe not as a poet. I'll keep it to compare it with other poetry, but on its own, not for me. Next up, I have Tiny But Mighty by Hannah Shaw, aka Kitten Lady. You may know Kitten Lady from online. She makes a lot of kitten care videos. I bought this because I too would like to foster kittens one day. That is a dream of mine. So I bought this book, and it is highly, highly effective as a teaching tool. It is got so much information in it. It is just perfect, and I love all of the little stories in between talking about all these kittens she saved. It gives me hope that I could help as many kittens as she has helped, even half of the kittens that she has helped, because she has helped like hundreds, maybe thousands of kittens, and I would love to do that one day. I just have to get through school so I can properly support myself and kittens. So, life goal. This is staying on my favorite shelf, and I'm going to keep it for a long time, because I'm definitely going to need it. Speaking of cats, mine is outside the door. Next up is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I really like this book. I don't even mean to be like, oh, it's Neil Gaiman, I'm gonna like it automatically. It just happened to like all of his work. I think it's just because it's right up my alley of stuff that I like. This is like a fantasy book, but it's written in a playful adult manner, which I really like. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And it's a very unique concept of trying to find a fallen star. I know it's supposed to be a twist in the book, but literally, like halfway through the book, everyone's like, oh, she's the fallen star. But it's like one of those classic fantasy tales, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. It allows itself to get goofy, which I really, really like. I'm not going to keep this copy because of the way that it bends. I can't really read the words all the way through. It's just really tiny in that aspect. but I will be getting a different copy of this. I think this will go in the little library as well, because I think someone would really, really like this book. I'm gonna let my cat in before he loses it completely. Next up is Doing It by Melvin Burgess. I give this one like a 4 out of 5 stars. It is a very interesting book. It's very, 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 very sexual, but in a high school way, because it's talking about like 4 different boys that are all growing up and dealing with sexuality, which I think is very interesting. A lot of books are written from like boys will be boys type thing, but this kind of shows like the consequences of certain aspects. It deals with a lot of uncomfortable subject matter though, so if you are not into things like literally pedophilia, a minor spoiler I guess, is that one of the teachers seduces one of these boys and has sexual intercourse with him. Which, I'm gonna go on a tiny tangent here. How come female teachers are allowed to get away with it so much more often? Like literally reverse the genders, and the guy would be like, he would be locked away forever, but for some reason when it's a lady it's okay. This isn't my book, by the way, it's my roommate's. I'm going to return it to her. I like it. I don't think I would read it again though. I think it's very interesting to have a book discuss male sexuality from a way that is just the way that they've been taught, which I think really speaks on how around sexuality boys are taught one way and girls another, which I think is very interesting. I would recommend this actually. I think it's pretty cool. I don't know if I would recommend it to someone in middle school, maybe a high schooler. I would like it if the characters in this book faced a little more consequence for some of their actions, because some of their actions are quite appalling. I wish that more characters, just period, faced more consequence for their actions. But it is a very good book discussing the way sexuality is taught to males versus females, and I think that's cool. So I'm gonna give that back to my friend now. Next up is Carry On by Rainbow Rowling. I kind of had high hopes for this book because I heard that it was one of the gays, which I am a fan of. What? Because I too am one of the gays. I am the B in the LGBT, so I was excited for this book. I was disappointed. The romance, quote unquote, comes kind of out of left field. Literally, they like decide to kiss for no reason, and I'm like, okay. Would have liked a little bit of mutual pining there, but it literally came out of nowhere. The school that the book takes place in isn't very well described. I wish that there was more attention given to the school. As it is, it's kind of derivative of Harry Potter. And I know it's hard to write a wizarding story that isn't at least a little bit derivative of Harry Potter, but this one was a lot like Harry Potter. They start school when they turn 11, they finish it when they turn like 17 or 18. Something about spells is that they derive magic from like phrases, which is, I'll say it's interesting, but it's not cool. Like, I thought it was kind of dumb. The ending to the book was dumb and I didn't like it because it was very predictable. I gave this like a 3 out of 5 stars. I didn't like it. I'm gonna give this back to my sister now because it's her book. I don't know if I'm going to read any more of Rainbow Rowling's books because it feels very like 2012 Tumblr-esque, in that it's more based on emotion than actual storytelling, which isn't my favorite. So, and that being said, there wasn't even that much emotion put into this book. There's a map of the school, but maybe 3 areas of the school were described. The romance was incredibly weak and came out of nowhere. I don't know if I'm gonna read the second book because I don't really care about these characters that much. They look nice, but they don't really have a personality. The female character in this book was rather annoying. In fact, a lot of the female characters in this book were pretty much annoying. They were given like 1 personality trait. That personality trait was ramped up to 100, and that's not a character. That's just a personality trait, sorry. So I'm gonna give this back. I might try to read Fangirl, but I will probably hate that book based on the time it was written in and what it sounds like, aka a 2012 Tumblr book. Cringy and would remind me too much of myself. high school when I was cringy. Next up is Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fanny Flagg. This is my mom's actually favorite movie, so I figured I would give it a try and read the book. I like it a lot. It still has the slight factor of being written a long time ago, so there are slurs in this book. There are a lot of slurs in the book. And I think I gave it like a 4 out of 5 stars. I know it's a product of its time, but it's still difficult to read and root for a character that uses a slur so frequently. It kind of tries to humanize characters of color, but they are also, the way that it's written out phonetically, the way that they talk, sounds like those old racist cartoons. And also has quite a white savior complex, which I'm also not a fan of. I like the story. I think it's cute. I think it's gay, which I like a lot. I didn't realize that this book was gonna be so gay. And I was like, hey there. Gives more attention to the lesbians, which is cool. But it's also written, it's a product of its time, so it's racist. So, but I like it. I want to watch the movie. I like the way that it's written when it goes from the past to the present. It goes off of news clippings and it follows a couple main characters. I like that the main character in this book is an older main character, because usually books written about women are about women in their like teens and 20s. But this is written about older women, which I think is very interesting. So I'm definitely going to, well actually I was going to say I'm going to keep this book. This isn't my book. I borrowed it from my friend's mom, so I will return it to her and find my own copy, because this is a great book and I want it on my shelf. Next up is the Unicorns of Balinor. This is a very random book, but it's been on my shelf for like 11 years and I never finished reading it. I finished reading it, it's okay, like 3 out of 5 stars. It's not unique or imaginative, it's kind of your standard fantasy tale about a girl and her unicorn. So it's very like horse girl-esque, which makes sense because I got it in my horse girl phase, which I am no longer in back. I would recommend this to people that are like into horses. If you have a horse girl, like a young horse girl, this is one of those elementary / late elementary, early middle school books that I would recommend. This is only the first 3. It goes all the way to 6, and I don't know if I'm going to read all the way to 6. I'm kind of okay with the story ending here. The story is they have to go to Balinor and get the unicorn's horn back, but like, it's suddenly they have like 5 or 6 side quests now because the book needs to be longer. And I still haven't completely finished the quest, but I am okay leaving it off here. I don't really care about the characters, but then again, this wasn't exactly written for me. It was written for middle schoolers. Maybe if this book was given more effort, like Narnia. Narnia is a classic and it's written for kids and adults. But this one was definitely written for kids. It's kind of written in the easy to read way. Not overly detailed, but also doesn't try to tackle any difficult plot lines, any intricate plot lines. It's very straightforward, which is fine for an easy book to read as a kid, but as an adult it's pretty boring and predictable. So I will not be keeping this. I will give this to a little library. I think some kid would definitely get more use out of it than I do. Next up is Exit Here. I hate this book so much. It is so bad. This is legit the worst book that I have ever read. It's true what they say, don't judge a book by this cover, because I was immediately drawn in because of the cover of this book, because it looked like it would be interesting. It's not good. I literally cannot remember a single character. A lot of them were exactly the same and they were all terrible people. This book is about terrible people doing terrible things and not really facing the consequence of their actions. There is not one single redeemable character in this book. Literally everyone sucks. They are like loser drug addicts in the way that they think it's fun and glamorous to be drug addicts, which problematic. Multiple characters in this book have committed sexual assault. Every female character in this book is written as, not in my words, but written as like a slut. The only description given are hair color and what they're wearing. Characters backstab each other in this book, and I don't even have anyone to root for because I don't care about any of these characters. They're all terrible. Literally all the main character does in this book is complain about things and do drugs and get drunk and sleep with people. I get you being apathetic towards things, but I can only be so sympathetic towards you when you are literally a trust fund baby. People like this need to like realize how good they have it and stop being so woe is me about things, because it could be way worse. I am definitely not keeping this book. I don't even think I want to give it to a little library because it's so bad. I want to like sell it back to Second and Charles and try to get something else that I will enjoy much better. I don't think I want to read any more of Jason Myers' work because this one was so bad. I had somewhat hope for this book because the back sounds interesting. Like it sounded like this character was going to struggle with problems and try to get over them, but he literally is apathetic until the very end of the book when he finally decides that he's going to turn himself in for doing something bad. And even then it's like an empty promise, because I'm like, cool, you're still a trash person this entire book and continued to be a trash person up until the very end, which does not redeem you. You're still a trash person. Worst book I've ever read, not keeping it, goodbye. Next up is Runaway Max. So this is a Stranger Things book. I actually read this because I wanted more information about Billy. Yes. That being said, I do not like the way that this book writes Billy, which is fine because it's not canon anymore because of season 3. This book is kind of like weirdly marketed in that it sounds like it would give more detail about Max and Billy and Max and Billy's relationship, which I think would be really interesting. But half of this book is like a retelling of season 2 from Max's perspective, which is fine, but I think it could have been marketed that way. So I read this book and I don't think, like, the way that Billy was written in season 2 was a jerk, but also kind of understandably a jerk because of the way that he was raised. I'm not trying to like apologize for all aspects of him because he's still not a great person, but you would kind of understand where it's coming from. This one he's just written like a blood psychopath. Like, in this one he's going to kill somebody. I would have liked it if this book was written more in a perspective of Billy and Max's relationship, but it's kind of like, here's the reason that they ended up in Hawkins. This was not written by either of the brothers that write Stranger Things. It was written by Brianna Jovanoff, yeah. This book I gave like a 3 out of 5 stars. Most of it was just season 2, which I had already seen. A little bit was about Max. The attention given to Billy wasn't very welcomed because of the way that he was written. I liked the bits about Max. I think it was interesting. That being said, the things that were written could already be construed from the way that the character is written on the show. So it doesn't really add that much to the Stranger Things universe, especially because half of it is not canon anymore. I don't think I'm going to be keeping this book. I don't think I'm going to be putting it in a little library either because I can't really see anyone else caring to read that much about Runaway Max. It was actually the least read book according to my reading challenge. Like, this book, out of all the books that I've read this year, this one was the least read. Only like 2,000 other people had read this book. So that being said, I think I'm just going to sell it back. I might read the other Stranger Things books, depending on whether or not they are written in the same aspect of rewriting from the season or giving more backstory, because I would like more backstory on the characters. It's just I don't want a retelling of the season that I already saw. Next up is Emergency Contact. I wanted to like this book. It's very pretty. It's another one of those, oops, I judged a book by its cover again. This book is meh. I gave it like 3 out of 5 stars. It's a romance book, so maybe that was my true downfall, is that I keep picking up romance books when I know that I don't like romance books. That being said, I don't think that the two characters in this book should date. They don't really have anything in common. Sam, I actually like Sam. This book is divvied up half from Penny's perspective and half from Sam's. I like Sam. Sam is a cool, down-to-earth, down-on-his-luck guy. I can relate to Sam. Penny is a snobby kid that judges other girls a lot and thinks her mom is annoying, which I get, but you could have just talked to your mom. Like, over half of this book, the conflict is she's mad at her mom for something that her mom had no control over. And I'm not going to say what that thing is because it's a spoiler in the book. It feels really weird and wrong to blame her mom for the thing that happened when it was the kind of thing that her mom didn't even know about for the longest time. And you can't blame someone for not doing something about something that they didn't know about. Penny is very judgy of other girls. She's like one of those ew preps types of girls, which, are we in middle school? I thought you were in college. Penny is obnoxious. I don't like her. I don't like her chapters. I don't like her, like, holier-than-thou attitude. It's really annoying. Sam is down to earth. He's a neat guy. I like Sam. I don't like Penny, so that's unfortunate because I don't like half of the book. I don't like one of the main characters. Every time it was one of Penny's chapters, I was like, oh great, I gotta read about Penny again. But every time a Sam chapter was coming up, I was, shh. I don't know who this book is really written for because I don't know who could like Penny as a character. I know someone could, so if you're into, I don't know, give it a read on the back of the book on Goodreads. If it sounds like something you're into, then go for it. Not keeping this one, either gonna sell it back or give it to a little library. And finally, Where'd You Go Bernadette? This book is like 3 out of 5 for me, maybe 2 out of 5. I like the mystery aspect of it, but it's very, very unrelatable because it's written from like a rich white family, which is so obnoxious to me. People that care about like what color the blinds are. I liked the eccentricity, is that the right word? Of Bernadette. She's very eccentric. There. Yes. Words. I like Bernadette in that she's eccentric. I don't like her husband because he does a thing later in the book that makes me hate him. Bernadette also has some form of mental illness, I'm sure, which makes her act irrationally, which I can kind of understand because ADHD be doing that sometime. A lot of this book is not mystery though. A lot of this book is just Bernadette dealing with her snobby friends, which I hate. And also being a very small bit snobby herself. They live in Washington, so they're part of like the homeowners association and all this like PTO meeting moms. It's very like Karens. This is a book about Karens. I wouldn't call Bernadette herself really Karen, but there are parts where I'm like, it's not that big a deal. Can you please shut up? Like so obnoxious over things that don't matter. And I hate characters like that. That are very Karenish in the way that they behave. Everything has to be perfect according to the handbook of white people nonsense. I hate that aspect. I like that Bernadette is kind of out there because that's relatable to me. I'm a little out there, so I can understand that much. However, I didn't really have a whole lot of characters to root for. I liked Bernadette and I liked her daughter. I liked the dad up until a certain point. Everyone else in the book, I'm like, get away from me, I hate you, Karen. It's written from an interesting perspective. I think it's like journal entries and emails and things, which the emails were written in that very Karen aspect that I hated, complaining about little crap that doesn't matter. But then again, those aren't the main characters. I don't really care to read this book again. It's probably another one bound for the little library because I think someone would really like this book. It's very, mystery aspect is cool. So maybe someone else will like this book. And the next books I have to look up on Goodreads because I don't have my physical copies with me. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime was another book that I read. very, very, very early in the year, so I don't remember too much of it, especially because I don't have the physical book with me to read. But it is also about an autistic individual. This one is a child. I thought it was interesting the way that it was written, in that things kind of make sense from his perspective, but you also know that they are irrational. I gave it a 4 out of 5. While it is interesting that it's written for that perspective, I also am very math illiterate. So I had trouble reading because there was a lot of like math equations that he would go on long tangents on. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, I don't understand. The main character is pretty much the only redeemable character in the book as well. But I think it's very interesting. I read 2 books this year based on autistic individuals, one adult, one a child. And I see the way that it affects people differently, which I think is very interesting. I don't think I'll read it again, but it's kind of a mystery type novel. It's a bit sad in that it also deals with parental abandonment issues. Give it a read if you like something like that. And the last book that I read that someone is currently borrowing is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlyn Dodie, another favorite. I really, really liked this book. I literally read it in a day. That was the one that I was going to get signed by Caitlyn, but I missed. It is a book about death questions asked by kids and answered by Caitlyn, which I think is really interesting. There are questions like, will my cat eat my eyeballs? Can I freeze dry my body? Can I be put into amber like a mosquito, trapped in amber? But those are all the books that I read in 2020. By the way, Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, 5 out of 5, perfect. Really cute. Well, 4 out of 5 because some of the questions she had answered online already, so I already knew the answer. I would have liked it if it was just all questions that had not been answered before, but because I watch her channel so frequently, I knew the answers to some of them. But if you're a first-time Caitlyn Dodie fan, or just curious about some of these death questions, I highly recommend it to people like that are curious about it. It's a really good place to start, as for all of her books. But those are all the books that I read in 2020. I have a very long reading list for 2021. And I think that I will also attach that at the end of this video based on maybe how long it is. But first, I'm gonna go charge my battery because it's about to die. See you maybe tomorrow, honestly, because the sunlight is fading and I have a lot of books to gather.